Hello, and thanks for listening to Forward, a podcast about the compelling stories, important issues, and memorable art that move us. My name is Mari.
And my name is Christopher.
Thanks for joining us this week.
Today, the topic of discussion is TV, and what of the shows we love today might be totally forgotten in just 10 years. But first, let's dive into our article Forward segment and share a couple stories that made us think this week. Mari, what are you recommending people check out?
So there was this article in NPR this week called The Key to Raising a Happy Child. And basically they interviewed the two authors of this book called The Self-Driven Child, The Science and Sense of Giving Your Kids More Control Over Their Lives. And it talks about how something that's really crucial to being happy in life is agency, or like having control over, your own destiny and like what happens in your life. And it talked about how kids over the past several decades have been having less and less agency as their, schools start having more control over how they learn, and there's a lot more rules, and parents have a lot more control over how kids spend their time, and homework is more demanding, and there's a lot more focus on, grades and getting into college. And this decrease in agency has correlated with an increase in anxiety and depression in kids. And what the book is talking about is a way to avoid that, is to give your kids a little bit more control back and a little bit more agency back. And what the authors, William Stixrud and Ned Johnson, recommend is viewing yourself more as a consultant for your kids rather than as their boss or their manager. So you make yourself available to them to help them and give them advice if they need it, but you are not there to control them and tell them what to do and keep them on task. So it's a really cool article, a lot of really interesting ideas in there about raising kids and education, which are things I'm really interested in. Definitely made me want to read this book. You should definitely check out this article. Again, it's an NPR article called The Key to Raising a Happy Child. The link will be in the description on SoundCloud.
All right, and my article this week is from The Atlantic, and it's called Can Planet Earth Feed 10 Billion People? So at this point, most people are probably just plain old sick of reading and hearing about food. There's the topic of GMOs, whether or not you should eat meat, buy organic, and the list seriously just goes on and on forever. But the reason I'm recommending this article is because it really transcends all this day-to-day discussion. It takes a macro look at our food production, and it really tackles the ultimate question. How can we make enough food to meet demand? And if we can, should we? This article is a fairly long read, and it's long because it really traces back to the beginning of our modern day food conflict. And it really corrals our conflict into two different schools of thought. So basically the author looks at one school of thought that he calls a group of wizards. And these are the people who want to use science to really push the limitations of what's possible in food production. And then he talks about a group called the prophets, who want a purer, more natural approach to farming. And even as I'm saying this, you can probably immediately see the modern day equivalent of both of these. So not only does this article trace kind of the last 10 years of this conflict, but it really shows what these groups are doing now, and more importantly, how all the decisions we're making today could really shape the future of our entire society and how we feed potentially our current population, especially in the age of climate change, but also as our population just really continues to grow.
It's really interesting.
Next up is our main segment of the podcast, which we call Forward Thinking. In this segment, we dig deeper into one topic that's been on our minds this week. In this episode, the topic of discussion is TV. We'll share our theories on what popular shows people are watching, writing, and tweeting about that might be totally forgotten, irrelevant, or just completely outdated in just a mere 10 years. So, have you ever gone back and watched a TV show that you used to love and suddenly find it just out of touch and full of cringeworthy jokes? I mean, of course, everyone has. And for me, the show that really embodies this is the show Entourage, which I'm kind of ashamed to admit I even watched as much as I did. And back in high school, it seemed totally harmless. It was just a show about cool movie stars living these charmed lives. And now when I watch it, which I think I did just a few years ago, it just feels like a show about these misogynist jerks. And a show like that would really never get made today. I think no one would disagree with that. And right now, we seem to have more higher quality shows than ever before. But we're also living in this era where culture is just moving and changing at this breakneck pace. What's popular one year could really be out of touch the next. And so we're going to dedicate some time to talking about if any of the shows that are trending today actually stand a chance at being remembered in, let's say, 5 to 10 years. And for me, because I'll get us kicked off in the discussion here today, I started to look at, okay, then what shows that we think about today are being most popular will be remembered. And honestly, I came to the conclusion, not very many. And just kind of thinking about what's most popular today would probably be helpful to chat about. So shows like The Big Bang Theory, The Walking Dead, Grey's Anatomy, football, obviously a little bit separate from this conversation, but clearly a juggernaut of a TV show, if we're going to call it that. Everything on Netflix, Amazon. So you have shows like Mindhunter, Narcos, House of Cards, The Crown. Like, everyone who's listening to this probably knows the shows I'm talking about, and they're popular. But honestly, I would argue that any show on Netflix, with the rare exception of 3, which I'm happy to share, I think will be totally forgotten. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think also the fact that there's just so much TV these days, it's actually kind of hard to think of a TV show that's watched by a majority of people the way like Friends was, or other shows like that, or even The Sopranos and Sex and the City they were on HBO, so not everybody was watching them, but they were still incredibly popular. These days, like, it's pretty much only The Big Bang Theory and some reality shows that are watched by a large proportion of the US. And so even like, really high quality shows that are popular, like Master of None or something like that, they're still kind of niche. So yeah, it's hard to even pinpoint like which shows are the most popular right now.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that Breaking Bad, which we've talked about, is probably one of the last shows with its modern day equivalent probably being a show like Game of Thrones that really everyone, like quote unquote, watches.
Yeah.
And I think Game of Thrones certainly is a show that I think will be remembered in 10 years, in the sense that it's obviously doing something that's never been done before in terms of bringing an absolutely new scale to TV. I mean, there's no real show like it. I think, a show like Westworld is probably the only other example, of course, on the same network, but that takes movie quality production and puts it in a TV show. And I think Game of Thrones is also just aided by the fact that its narrative is fairly strong and its characters are pretty memorable. You brought up a show, The Big Bang Theory. And again, when I was thinking about this and thinking about this framework, I think The Big Bang Theory and the other kind of most popular show I was thinking about, The Walking Dead, fall into this second category of show where they're kind of fulfilling a basic human need. And what I mean by a basic human need is just like the need to watch something, the need to be entertained. And a show like The Big Bang Theory, that's all it's doing. It's just kind of transporting my mind for 30 minutes after work, after my workout, when I just want to literally think about nothing, which is sometimes that's what that show feels like. It feels like nothing.
It's like 2.5 Men, all that kind of stuff. See, yeah.
Oh my God, I'm so glad you brought up 2.5 Men.
Yeah.
I literally forgot that show existed.
Well, yeah, and people will forget about The Big Bang Theory too.
No, totally. And a show like The Walking Dead, which literally only gets more popular, I think it fills this need just to watch violence. And I would argue Monday Night Football, really any football, is doing the same thing. You just want to see some kind of exertion of human violence because you can't do it in your day-to-day life. And obviously, a bunch of video games are fulfilling the same need. And just like football kind of remains ever popular, it obviously never goes off the air. A show like The Walking Dead will one day go off the air, and another show will just fill its place. And someone could easily argue a show like Game of Thrones is just fulfilling that need too. It's this need to see violence. I think Game of Thrones is doing more, but it's definitely tapping into that too.
Yeah, I think that Game of Thrones will kind of be remembered in the same way that Lost is, where Lost was one of the original shows of the modern era that was like a serial, like, high production drama that was like super captivating, and everybody was kind of really getting into it. And people still kind of talk about Lost, but it's not this huge cultural, touch point that it used to be. But I think it'll be remembered, like, Game of Thrones will be remembered in the same way as like a kind of unique sort of show that ushered in like a new, minor era of TV.
Oh, for sure. And as much as we talk about streaming network shows like Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, I would also say none of them have really made any show worth remembering. And I'll touch on, I think, maybe like the 3 exceptions. But they're trying so hard just to make good shows that just feel really similar to what we already think is good, because obviously they want to be around for the next 5 years. But I don't think Amazon at all has produced a show worth remembering. I think something like Transparent before the Jeffrey Tambor controversy, that stood a chance at being something different. Obviously that show's going nowhere. I think Hulu with The Handmaid's Tale, I mean, like, Hulu can't produce anything good, but I think The Handmaid's Tale, if it continues on its same trajectory, like, could potentially fit some of these needs in terms of being, like, obviously very socially progressive, doing something that's never been done before. I think tackling this woman's journey in this obviously dystopian environment, I really can't think of any other TV show, at least off the top of my mind, that does that. And obviously it's sharing a lot of cultural truths at the time, and just even how we're feeling about our own country. And I think Netflix, I mean, they churn out a new show a week. They're all just kind of riffs and versions on things we already love. I think only shows that could potentially be remembered is a show like Black Mirror. Mm-hmm. Just in terms of, I can't think of anything that's like that on the air today. And also that kind of cultural truth idea where it's talking about how we're feeling about technology now and this kind of growing anxiety over its control of our lives. Mm-hmm. And I think a show also like Orange is the New Black, obviously very unique in terms of the types of stories that are being told in that. I don't think have ever really been captured in the way they have been on Orange before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I'm even trying to think now about, TV shows from the 90s or the aughts that are remembered now. And there's not that many. It's like, it's like I was saying before, Sex and the City and The Sopranos. And other than that, it's like Seinfeld and Friends. And like The Simpsons. But The Simpsons is obviously still going, so it's a little bit different. But that's it. And like Friends is the only one of those that's like, it's just basic, lowest common denominator sitcom.
Yeah, I'm actually really trying to rack my brain as to why Friends is remembered. Like, I can really understand why Sex and the City is remembered. Mm-hmm. It's probably the first time ever where you have, female sexuality shown on a major show like that.
Right. And it was raunchy and,
yeah.
It was like they were cursing and stuff. And it was, like you couldn't see that on regular TV.
And like looking back now, Sex and the City certainly feels dated,
yeah.
But and just because I watched an episode of it maybe like 6 months ago, mm-hmm. I don't know, there's still something so like time capsule-y about it too, just how we were feeling about women, how we were feeling about, female sexuality in the early aughts. I think it'll endure forever.
Yeah, I think it became a really big cultural touch point, and I think that's the reason why Friends endures too, is that it was so tied to popular culture in a lot of ways at the time, and because it was just something that everybody watched, it became just part of the tapestry of our society, and so it'll just be remembered for that, even though it wasn't a very good show.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, that style of show is very forgettable. Mm-hmm. And we were kind of talking a little bit about this before actually recording, but a show like How I Met Your Mother pretty much was the modern day Friends for the late aughts, 2010s mm-hmm. era. I mean, I forgot that show existed.
Yeah, it's already
already totally forgotten. Mm-hmm. And I think certainly that show has its own baggage, especially with the Barney Stinson character and the main character whose name I forgot, despite having watched 6 seasons of that show, Ted. Just their treatment of women would never fly today on a modern day sitcom. Right. But yeah, I mean, completely forgettable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, the only other sitcom of like a similar era that people still really love is The Office. You know, and by that era I mean like kind of the aughts into the tens, you know.
Yeah, and you know, I almost don't know how long The Office will stick around, but like it's so wholesome and good. Like the first 4 seasons of The Office, I don't know, it just makes me feel good thinking about it. And I will say, like, people really got caught up in The Office, like obviously with the Jim Pam romance. It just like was kind of this touch point and something like you regularly went back to, and it was low commitment, but also just like high reward. Yeah. I always left feeling great.
Yeah. Well, and I think they did a good job of, you know, drawing their characters pretty well-rounded. And also of not only avoiding being problematic, but even kind of like drawing attention to problematic behavior through the Michael Scott character. And so I think that kept it relevant.
It's so interesting you bring that up. I never would have thought The Office as being a socially progressive show, but you're actually kind of right. I'm thinking about...
I mean, it's not revolutionary or anything, well, but compared to The Big Bang Theory, you know?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Totally. Like, compared to other shows like it, none of them were talking about any of that kind of stuff. No. I mean, the fact that these kind of toxic male characters, especially in an office environment... most, you know, like for the most part, they're kind of held up as being this ideal. I'm thinking about a show like Mad Men, which I know you loathe. The Don Draper character is almost a slicker version of the Michael Scott character, where he has this like, you know, inflated sense of ego and thinks everyone loves him, and that he can do no wrong. It's like how could any idea that comes out of his head not be great? And in The Office, you kind of loathe his character. Yeah. But like he's well drawn enough that you want to still see him succeed. Whereas Don Draper, you kind of just want him to crash and burn. Yeah. No, go on. You were about to say something.
No, it's just that you know, that I think that all that helps. You know, I think that shows that fail to have kind of like social progressiveness are the ones that'll be the most easily forgotten.
One other thing I wanted to bring up is I think we've talked a lot about just nuts and bolts, what will be remembered, but kind of more broadly, like what cultural trends going on right now could potentially throw off some of the typical rules, or just like cultural trends in general. Like, are we looking for more gritty shows? Are we looking for more comedy? I thought about that too. And here's generally what I'm thinking, at least, whether or not it's actually true. Just that, especially with us being in this Trump era of the world, really, I feel like there's this greater appetite towards shows that depict like honest reality. So things that aren't phony, but that feel real, but not so real as that they're gritty. And I'll kind of explain more about that. And I think this era of being more cynical is almost over. I think we're definitely skeptical and wary of phony things, but I think we're desperate for things that are more earnest, but also like earnesty that's earned. It actually feels sincere and genuine. Yeah. And I think a lot of shows, when you start thinking about it, kind of fall into this bucket of being real but not gritty, and being earnest but being earnest and actually being sincere. Shows like Star Wars, a movie like Star Wars, shows like This Is Us and Modern Family, both very popular shows. And even the 2 rival superhero movies kind of both embody this. You have the Marvel movies, which really do depict their reality in their own right. There is loosely stakes. If something gets destroyed in a movie, like there are, like people die, it's remembered, but it's not gritty. No one would ever call any of the Marvel movies gritty, but they're obviously not a total fantasy. And then also all the Marvel movies, they are definitely earnest in their own right. Like people are going on a quest to, like achieve their own greatness. But it's also sincere, like I never doubt their intentions for wanting to be a better person, be a better hero. On the flip side, though, you have these DC movies. I think especially like the Batman movies, which I could not imagine being made today and making as much money. But they're so gritty, it's kind of exhausting. They're almost too real, and they're not earnest, but they're not cynical. I don't even know what they are. They're just tired. Like I'm thinking of Bruce Wayne. It's just he doesn't have this desire to be a better hero. He just wants to like endure and survive, and that this is his only way he knows how to survive. It's just, I don't know. I think we're just totally over that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that people are kind of tired of cynicism right now, and people are looking for like something that's real. But it's interesting because I think that, and I think also even social progressiveness on TV and like diversity and how we represent minority populations on TV isn't really like a straight line or a smooth progression of like steadily getting more progressive and more aware. It seems like it's really reactive to what's going on in society at the time. It seemed like in like the 80s and 90s there was a lot more of this feeling of like we need to focus on diversity and we need to focus on racism, and so there were a lot more TV shows with like that focused on Black families. There was like actually probably more diversity on network TV than there is now, and then in like kind of the 2000s I feel like it tapered off a little bit. And there was this idea that racism was kind of not an issue anymore, and so there wasn't as much of a push to specifically include it. And now, and then like Obama was president, it's like, oh, racism is over. Yeah. So we don't need to worry about it anymore. And now kind of the opposite is happening, obviously, where we're very aware that racism is very much alive and well. And so now there's more of a push to have like, women in TV shows and, like transparent, like, transgender and LGBT people in TV shows. And there's Blackish and there's Fresh Off the Boat. And I think, there is this like just reaction to the way that society is in the moment, and that's reflected in the TV of the time. But who knows in 8 years what the climate's going to be and how that's going to affect how we portray ourselves and what we want to see on TV.
It does feel like there's a greater urgency in making shows that keep pace with culture, and like part of that urgency could just be it's the right thing to do, which it obviously is. I'm wondering if even part of that urgency though is just this desperate desire to make money. I feel like you hear all the time just how difficult the movie business is, and they're just kind of spotting social trends to be like, what can we make next that's just going to be this, I don't know, like this honeypot of money. And I think a movie like Black Panther is actually like a perfect example of that. I'm sure like 3 years ago, Marvel was probably thinking like, oh my God, we have to start diversifying our superhero franchise. And one, it was the right thing to do. But also like it's how they sustain themselves and make money. And it's actually driven a lot of good shows. But like you're saying, if cultural trends keep shifting and Hollywood shifts with it, like who knows just what falls by the wayside.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think it also just shows that in the past like 30 years or so, there has been some progression, nationally in terms of like civil rights and just like recognition of like LGBT populations and, lots of other issues. But it also just shows that we haven't come all that far, because we are still fighting to, have like Black people in TV shows and have Asian people in TV shows, and to have like a superhero movie that's, has a Black cast. It's like, this is like a new thing, and it's kind of crazy that it's a new thing. And so, yeah, I think that the actual, like, you know, progression of these, like, social mores and you know, being more inclusive on TV and in movies is going to take a really long time, because it's going to be this sort of roller coaster of just reacting to what the cultural climate is at the time, and hopefully over the decades it'll slowly be getting better and better.
Yeah, and I think it's entirely possible with what you're talking about just the ever-shifting cultural trends dictating what content is being created, and also just in general the fractured TV environment, that there is just less shows that are going to be remembered. I mean, granted, everything is kind of forgotten over 100 years and more, but I think even in the short term, more things are just going to be forgotten in the race to constantly create new shows and new content. Again, kind of with Netflix, just constantly churning out new shows. Just a sheer numbers game, most of them are going to be totally forgotten. Yeah. If even very good.
Yeah, it's true. And, you hope that, like you were talking about Black Panther, and we just read today that it had the 5th biggest box office opening of all time. And that kind of echoes what research has been showing for the past several years, that, a huge portion of the movie-going population is not white. And they've just been, Hollywood has kind of just been ignoring these segments of the population, and just, assuming that they'll just keep going to see white people in movies, completely neglecting the idea of having, movies about, other different types of people, and thinking that could also make a ton of money because people actually really want to see that. And so, hopefully, content producers will start seeing trends like that, and seeing that, diversity is needed and it's wanted by, people who are consuming media, and that it can make money, and it does make money, and, that the culture will shift in the direction of asking for more of that. And then, because there's so much content, only the stuff that's really popular will survive.
Agreed. Any final thoughts?
No, I think that's about it.
Our final segment of the podcast is Watch List. In this segment, we recommend one TV show or movie that's flying beneath the radar but is worth checking out. This week, though, we're actually going to be recommending a book. The book is called What If We're Wrong by Chuck Klosterman, and it ties in really well with the discussion of this podcast. Basically, what Chuck Klosterman does is, in a series of essays, he looks hundreds of years in the future and questions what ideas that we're so sure about today might we be wrong about in 300 years. He talks about topics like gravity, and despite being something we think we know everything about, is there something we're missing? He talks about things like, are we living in some kind of computer simulation? Kind of the typical far-flung conspiracy theories, but talks with a lot of different experts in their own fields to add an extra layer of credibility. There's definitely more accessible topics. He talks about what one rock and roll band will actually be remembered in 300 years, which is probably my favorite essay. It's really a book that you can pick up and put down pretty easily, again, because it's divided into about 12 different essays. And if nothing else, it's definitely a book that's going to make you think.
That's it for this episode. If you're enjoying Forward, please be sure to subscribe in iTunes or on your podcast app of choice to always get the latest episode.
Thank you so much for listening. If you ever have any questions, thoughts, or topic suggestions, you can always shoot us an email at forwardpodcast@gmail.com. That's fwdpodcast@gmail.com. Goodbye for now.